to enter the Zoom room, and then we will get started. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. I'm going to jump right in as we have limited time with some of our panelists today, and we are eager to focus on the content. My name is Allie Gold-Roberts, and I'm the Director of State Policy at Ceres. And I'm joined today by an incredible panel of speakers. Steve Molk from IKEA Retail USA, Will Torr from Colorado Energy Office, Chris King from Siemens eMobility, Kathleen Theohardis from Massachusetts Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, and Meg Villarreal from Nestle. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Ceres, and then we'll dive right into the content. Ceres, as many of you know, works with the largest and most influential investors and companies in the world to drive solutions throughout the economy and to tackle some of the most pressing issues of our time: climate change, water scarcity, and pollution, and inequitable workplaces. I'm pleased to introduce two of our major networks of companies who we work with on climate and in particular transportation policy. First is our Bicep Coalition, a coalition of over 70 corporations, Fortune 500 consumer-facing brands, all committed to leveraging their political power to advance climate solutions. We also partner, and my apologies, Anna, if we can just skip to the next couple slides. Thank you. We can skip again. Thank you. We also partner with hundreds of companies across the US for our state and federal policy. Our members see climate change as a major economic risk, and investing in clean technologies like zero-emission medium and heavy-duty vehicles as an economic opportunity. We bring that message to policymakers federally and in 17 states, and we are thrilled to have some Bicep members on today's call, including Nestle and IKEA. In addition, I also help coordinate some of our policy work with the Corporate Electric Vehicle Alliance, also known as CEVA, a group of over 20 companies with significant corporate fleets focused on accelerating the transition to electric vehicles. We're thrilled to have two CEVA members, IKEA and Siemens, on today's call. Through CEVA, we help companies achieve their bold fleet electrification goals. And one of the primary reasons these companies form the coalition is that they are finding it difficult to acquire the electric vehicles they want to buy to transition their fleets. Which brings me to the star policy of today's event. We'd love to chat with you about the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. The ACT, or the Advanced Clean Truck Rule, sets annual increasing sales targets for truck manufacturers. This helps require that a certain percentage of their sales be zero-emission trucks, and that the percentage increases year over year, moving faster for segments of the market where the technology is already cost-effective. By requiring truck manufacturers to sell a certain percentage of zero-emission trucks, the ACT rule helps companies gain access to models that they've been struggling to find, and importantly, will also accelerate innovation and investment. And of course, increase charging infrastructure, while helping to create the economies of scale and unlock associated cost reductions. And with that, we have some breaking news. As part of this webinar today, we're thrilled to be releasing a new letter outlining support from companies, investors, and institutions with outlining their support for states to adopt the ACT. More than 70 companies, institutions, and investors have signed this letter, and we'll be putting the letter in the chat for those of you who would like to see the full list of signatories. It includes major fleet operators like IKEA, Nestle, Siemens, Unilever, and major brands that rely on trucking as part of their business, whether that's Etsy, eBay, New Belgium Brewing, Sierra Nevada, and more. And of course, we also have investors representing nearly 43 billion in assets under management. We're also going to be sharing some links to our press release for the letter and our webpage on company support for clean trucks, all in the chat. So please feel free to check out those links and resources. Before I invite our distinguished speakers to share their thoughts, I wanted to briefly summarize the reasons why we're seeing support for the ACT and similar policies to advance medium and heavy duty electrification. First and foremost, from a business perspective, businesses want to capture savings. There's a growing business case for investing in electrification. Many EV trucks already generate significant savings over the life of a vehicle through reduced maintenance costs and lower predictable fuel costs. Beyond the savings, we know that mitigating climate change and the significant economic risk that we know climate change poses is a major priority. Transportation is the largest source, 29% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, and in most states, and has been steadily growing. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, businesses are making the public health and air quality connection and really taking action on this front. Transportation is one of the largest sources of air pollution, creating a significant and costly public health burden that is disproportionately shouldered by the low-income and communities of color. Clean trucks translate to a very real human benefit in avoided asthma and heart attacks, as well as lost days of work and school. So with that, I would like to pass it on to our speakers, and we'll open up so you can see all of them, and we'll start our panel. We'll begin by having each of our speakers give about 5 minutes of remarks about what their company or their state is doing around medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification, and in particular, the Advanced Clean Truck Rule where appropriate. And then we'll open it up to Q&A. So with that, let's start with Stephen at IKEA. And Stephen, we'll just pull up your video and get you set. Great. All right, Stephen, let's unmute you. Sorry, there you go.
Ah, fantastic. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Allie. So I'm Stephen Mulk. I'm the project implementation manager for IKEA's zero-emission delivery ambitions in the United States, which is part of a larger global goal to provide all of our customers with zero-emission home delivery by 2025. And the big challenge that we've been up against is the fact that IKEA in the United States doesn't actually own any vehicles. Like many retailers, we outsource our transportation to third-party logistics companies, and in turn, they don't own any vehicles either. So today, the vehicles are owned largely by independent contractor drivers or contract carriers, which are kind of small mom and pop businesses. And so the real question is how to get access to those folks. How do you give them access to electric trucks, and which today are can be kind of expensive and hard to finance and things like that. So what we've done is we've implemented a rental model through our partner Fluid Truck to provide a rental fleet that can then give access to those contractors. So those contractors can then rent the electric trucks from our rental fleet on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. Anyway, a very short-term basis, not without having to sign up for a longer lease term or mortgage the house or something like that in order to get one. So that's how we've kind of solved the vehicle access problem. And the other problem is really our where to put the infrastructure. In most of our markets, the only real estate that we have are really our stores, and our stores aren't necessarily the best place for our goods flow to go. So we've had to consider rerouting goods flow and things like this in order to make that happen. And then, of course, we're installing charging infrastructure at as many stores as we can. Hopefully soon, all of them. So that is our goal, and that's kind of how we're tackling it. But really glad to support Ceres and the ACT. I think that will help bring us some more choices, bring costs down. Our rental model allows us to be OEM agnostic, so the more the better. And ultimately, get those trucks into the larger marketplace and available for those independent contractors and contract carriers to eventually purchase themselves, perhaps in the secondary market. Because that's really the ultimate goal, is to get our third-party logistics companies to offer zero-emission delivery on their menu of services, so that we can kind of go back to just purchasing transportation the way we always have. So with that, I'll pass it back to the other panelists.
Great. Thanks so much, Stephen. And we're excited to dive in more deeply on some of the work that IKEA has done. And obviously, folks are excited to see electric vehicles deliver IKEA furniture to their home one day soon. So with that, let me kick it over to Chris King at Siemens eMobility to talk a little bit, and then we'll move on to our next speaker. Chris, we'll get you on video in just a moment, it looks like. Chris, do we have you? Oh, there you go. We just need to unmute you. Oh. Go ahead.
That should be work. That should work. Sorry
Thanks
about
so much. No worries.
So yeah, thank you for having me. This is great that Sirius is putting this on. A little bit about Siemens. We are a global, obviously, technology corporation. We are happy to employ over 50,000 Americans in our business, and also glad that we're the first large industrial corporation to commit to net zero by 2030, which is one of the earlier dates. And we are actually over halfway to that goal already. So in this space, we are both a customer and a supplier for zero emission vehicles, both trucks and light duty vehicles. Our fleet globally is over 50,000 vehicles, mostly of the smaller type. We have small trucks and vans who go out and do building energy management services. You'll often see Siemens trucks on the road out there. On the other side, we are also a supplier of all types of energy technology, including wind power. And it's not as well known, but we're a leader in providing EV charging technologies, including in the ZEV space, hydrogen. We're one of the leaders there. We make the largest hydrolyzers in the world. I want to hit on a couple of points. One is around the benefit areas to society, to consumers. And this is one reason we support this technology. There are three categories that we see when you deploy electric vehicles. They're the economic savings to the owners, mostly reduced fuel costs, but lower total lifetime costs of the vehicles. The second is the health and environmental benefits, of course. And then the third is, and this doesn't get talked about very much, is the savings to non-owners. And that's because when you're charging EVs, you're using power and you're paying for that power. And it's going through the same electricity grid that's already there. You don't need to build a new grid for it. And as long as you're using it mainly off peak, then you don't have to supplement that grid. You're going to have to do a little bit here and there, but you shouldn't have to do too much if you manage the charging well. And what does that translate? Well, for a typical light duty vehicle, over its life, it's about $3,500 in our analysis to non-EV owners. So as you watch that person drive their new Ford F-150 Lightning down the road, and you don't yet own an EV, that is savings that's going to come partly to you in your electricity rates. So just to sum up, why do we support the Advanced Clean Truck Rule? And we'll get into some of the details of the rule. But again, the environmental benefits are fantastic. These vehicles, the MD and HD vehicles, make up less than 10% of the total vehicles on the road, but 29% of the greenhouse gases. Now, transport overall is 29%, but MDHD is 29% of transportation, and over 60% of the air pollutants, the NOx and the particulates and so on. And then on the other side, I mentioned economic benefits, and the Advanced Clean Truck Rule in California is going to bring about $6 billion in economic, quantifiable fuel savings, maintenance savings, benefits to businesses in California using those vehicles. And on top of that, $9 billion worth of quantified health benefits. So we're strong supporters of this. Look forward to the conversation and how we can continue to promote adoption of ACT and zero emission vehicles generally.
Thanks so much,
Back
Chris.
to you, Ellie.
And I should have mentioned that, many folks, for folks who don't know, the Advanced Clean Truck Rule has already been approved in California and will, be implemented soon. So it's great to hear those California stats that you shared, Chris, on some of the benefits already. Fantastic. Well, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Secretary Katie Theoharides. of the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts, my home state, to talk a little bit about how Massachusetts is in particular thinking about medium and heavy duty vehicles.
Well, thank you, Allie. It is such a pleasure to be with all of you today to talk about our work in Massachusetts on climate change, and particularly our plan to adopt the California Advanced Clean Trucks Rule and other efforts we're taking to really accelerate the adoption of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is really a leader in terms of aggressive climate mitigation as well as adaptation actions across the country. We have a net zero target for 2050 and the most ambitious new climate law in the country with a 50% emission reduction required by 2030. And one of the pieces that has been critical to this work going forward is a cross-sector plan we have to align our programs going into this decade with that longer term 2050 emissions target. As I think everyone gathered probably knows, transportation is Massachusetts' largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. That's a story that's true really across the country. It's 42% of our mix for 2018 emissions, and medium and heavy duty trucks are a significant portion of those emissions. And perhaps even more importantly, trucks are a major source of nitrogen oxides, particulate matter, and toxic air emissions, and they tend to be concentrated in areas with environmental justice communities, vulnerable populations, and people of color. So as part of our interim clean energy and climate plan for 2030, which spells out those next policies for the next 10 years, we are committed to adopting and implementing the zero emission vehicle purchase mandates of the California Advanced Clean Trucks Rule by December 31st of this year. So we're on a very tight time frame to do this. And as part of this, we're doing this as part of a 3-part portfolio in terms of things we're adopting from California. So this will be part of adopting California's heavy duty GHG phase 2 and heavy duty and NOx omnibus rule, which establish more stringent GHG and NOx emission standards, which are both important rules for emission reductions and public health benefits. And then also California's one-time fleet reporting rule, which requires that certain large entities submit a one-time report in June of 2022 on their medium and heavy duty vehicles to help the state assess the best ways to develop charging infrastructure and programs that will support and accelerate the transition of the medium and heavy duty fleet to electrification. We have really for a very long time been at the forefront of states who have adopted California standards and first adopted California's low emission vehicle standard all the way back in 1991. And in fact, Massachusetts law requires that we adopt California's vehicle emission standards if they achieve greater emissions than the federal standards. And so that's been a significant part of our work. And we're very excited today to be saying that we are working to adopt the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule on a very accelerated basis. And as I mentioned, this is important not only because of climate change, but because of the serious health risks, especially in environmental justice communities. And we think it's a game changer in terms of moving the market to where it needs to go. I would also say, in addition to adopting the ACT regulations, we've been very actively engaged in supporting other efforts to accelerate this market. Massachusetts is one of 15 states and DC to sign a memorandum of understanding back in July of 2020, committing to working collaboratively to advance and accelerate the market for medium and heavy duty vehicles, including working on large pickup trucks and delivery trucks, vans, et cetera, things we have seen a lot more of on the road in recent days. And the goal is really to ensure that 100% of all new trucks and bus sales are zero emissions by 2050. We were also one of the first states to join California in committing to 100% zero emission passenger vehicles by 2035 through the Advanced Clean Car Rules. And in our own state, we are focused on supporting the deployment of zero emission vehicles through incentive programs, including $60 million commitment to support EV and EV truck adoption through our EV rebate programs. We've made significant investment in charging infrastructure through both utilities, through the Volkswagen settlement, and through funding at our Department of Environmental Protection. And we have a new program at our Massachusetts Clean Energy Center that's working to provide fleet advisory services to large fleets, particularly fleets located in environmental justice areas that are looking at transitioning their fleets to electric vehicles. Certainly a lot more work going on, but I should also mention that we've been working for a long time now with Ceres and with states in the Northeast region to establish the Transportation and Climate Initiative program that would provide the first enforceable limits on transportation emissions and hundreds of millions of dollars for additional investment in clean transportation, improving public health and improving the livability of environmental justice communities. This is all anchored in a cleaner, modern transportation system, and we are looking forward to additional opportunities, including hopefully federal infrastructure funding, to really begin turning the page on dirty vehicles. So thank you, Ali, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Secretary. And clearly the Commonwealth is very busy and has a lot going on. And it's great to see that, you know, the California rules and the whole suite of policies, not just the ACT, are on the agenda. So we'll get back to more of that when we get to the Q&A, I promise. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Meg Villarreal from Nestle. And Nestle is a member of our Bicep network, and Meg has joined us on lots of policy work, but in particular, we're here to chat about the work that obviously Nestle is doing to electrify their fleet. So Meg, take it away.
Thank you, Ali. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Meg Villarreal with Nestle. Nestle is the largest global food company, and within the U.S. market, we have 52 factories in 24 states with over 35,000 employees across the country. Nestle has always been very committed to our climate and sustainability plans and objectives at the global level. And we've set a global target of reaching net zero by 2050 and have set forth some pretty significant and progressive science-based targets in order to do so. Those SBTIs really center on a number of different areas, including 100% renewable energy by 2025, a lot of the work that we're doing in regenerative agriculture, because of course our producers are a huge part, not only of the business that we do, but of our climate footprint. Packaging goals that we have, and a lot of carbon neutral brand strategies that we're working on in the immediate and short-term future. Distribution is actually less than 5% of Nestle's total GHG emissions. And over 99% of our transportation fleet is leased through third-party suppliers. The third-party trucking companies, as I'm sure many of you already know or can guess, many of them are small businesses, and they don't always have the resources to buy electric, medium, and heavy-duty trucks, and are uncertain about making the investments in this type of new technology and infrastructure if they can't guarantee that their clients are going to use the trucks. Nestle's indicated to all of our trucking partners that we would absolutely use electric vehicles and electric trucks. And so part of the reason that we are, actively advocating for ACT and for policies that support clean trucks and clean vehicles is because incentives to assist these companies in the purchase and transition to electric trucks is very key to making sure that customers like us can then utilize that type of trucking and technology. As Ali alluded to, there are a number of electrification projects that Nestle is actually working on and that we have underway. They're mostly on short haul routes, and we are also in the process of electrifying the yard spotters that we have at many of our factories and distribution centers. And yard spotters are the small trucks that just operate on the factory and distribution center property, but never actually go out on the road. However, these electrification projects will only reduce our carbon footprint by a small fraction of what is necessary to meet our climate goals and our climate targets that we have. So significant reduction in transportation emissions will really come from electrifying the long haul, medium, and heavy duty trucks that we have in our network. And again, that we utilize through our third party trucking companies. And I think I'll kind of wrap it up there at this point, and turn it back to Allie. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Meg. Well, we are waiting for Will Torr from the Colorado Energy Office to join us in just a moment. So in the interim, let's pull up the whole panel. And when Will joins in, we'll give Will a chance to give a few remarks about Colorado. But in the interim, I think we wanted to start a little bit of the Q&A. And in particular, why don't we just start with some of the other companies on the line and get a sense from any of you who are interested, Chris, Meg, or Stephen, who want to jump in with just why the private sector needs policymakers to adopt policies like the Act. You know, I imagine some folks could say, oh, can't you do this on your own? And we know that that's maybe not the case. So I don't want to answer the question for you, but I'll let each of you kind of weigh in on where you see the need for policy. And maybe, Chris, we start with you, since I know you guys have really been thinking about this already in some of the work in California.
Sure, happy to jump in. So this was actually one of the alternatives that was looked at in California. So there's a question, right? Do you impose these mandates on the vehicle manufacturers, or do you impose it on the fleet owners? And if you just impose it on us, we can't buy the vehicles unless they're there, right? So California looked at this and said, well, we're going to have to impose this mandate on the manufacturers first. But California is also planning to impose it on the fleet owners as well. So we're all in this together. We all have our requirements, and we'll all work together to achieve these targets.
Great. Stephen, can I turn it to you?
Sure. I mean, I agree with what Chris said there. You know, we can be required to buy the vehicles, but like I said in my intro, we don't actually own any vehicles to buy. So by requiring the OEMs to put them to make them available, then that just gives us kind of a wider range of vehicles to choose from, and some different types of form factors that we can go for. And it also means that the manufacturers are not just concentrating on one or two, form factors here, that they're looking to kind of maximize the sales of these electric vehicles as well. So, and like Chris says, in California, they're working on both the supply side and the demand side there. So I think that's a good approach for it.
Great. Meg.
Thanks, Allie. So I think that, ACT policies are incredibly important to us because, like IKEA, we don't own most of our fleet. And as I mentioned in some of my remarks, we would be incredibly open to utilizing and using electric medium and heavy duty trucks. And so if companies and trucking companies are able to make the investments in purchasing those vehicles, we certainly as a customer would be a huge driver of using and implementing those throughout our system. I think that, any policies that states can adopt, such as the ACT, will go a long way in making medium and heavy duty trucks more widely available to customers throughout the country. A few additional steps that states can also take would include infrastructure investments in things like DC level 3 charging stations, and financial incentives for the purchase of electric trucks, similar to the financial incentives that are made available for the purchase of electric passenger cars. So there's a lot that states can do, I think, to encourage the industry to start to shift. And now it's more necessary than ever. I mean, I think that everybody kind of widely knows the statistics that transportation comprises 29% of GHG emissions in the US. And medium and heavy duty trucks are a disproportionate source of those emissions. They make up only 5% of the trucks that are on the road, but 25% of the overall US transportation emissions. So there's significant and eye-opening statistics that kind of require attention from state level policymakers and from the federal government in the immediate future.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I think that was a really comprehensive, you all added something. And in particular, Chris, I really appreciate what you said, that, we're thinking about requirements on all sides. Everybody's going to play a role here. Companies who own fleets, companies who use third parties for their fleets, and the manufacturers. We need all the tools in the toolbox in order to do this. So Will, we had started the Q&A because we wanted to make sure we got through things in time for you. So Will, we're going to turn it back to you. I apologize. Then we'll go back to the Q&A, and thank you, audience, for sticking with us. Will, we're going to give you about 5 minutes to just talk a little bit about how Colorado's thinking about medium and heavy duty electrification, and obviously building off of the incredible success that you all have had on clean cars relatively recently. So Will, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll gladly turn the microphone over to you.
Great, thank you very much. Yeah, Will Torr, the Executive Director of the Colorado Energy Office. And from state of Colorado perspective, we are very interested in making progress in the medium and heavy duty vehicle space. As a state, we have targets of a 90% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions economy-wide by 2050. And while we are moving sort of very rapidly to decarbonization in the electricity space, transportation is more challenging. And the state has adopted a goal on the light duty side of 1 million electric vehicles by 2030. The governor signed the multi-state MOU on medium and heavy duty vehicles last summer. And we've been actively working on developing a clean trucking strategy in the intervening year. The biggest substantive step that we were able to take forward was actually in the legislature this spring through the passage of legislation that addressed our transportation funding challenges. The overall bill raised about $5 billion for transportation investments, with just under $1 billion of that directed to transportation electrification, with a significant focus on medium and heavy duty fleets. It actually created 3 electrification enterprises, one to build out infrastructure, both charging infrastructure and hydrogen fueling infrastructure, one to invest in clean transit buses, and one to invest in clean fleet vehicles. So a significant step forward in terms of bringing state investment in infrastructure and incentives for fleet transition. We're just at the point where we're really beginning a serious state discussion about the potential regulatory tools. The week after next, we will be releasing a sort of deep dive technical analysis of the medium and heavy duty vehicle fleet in Colorado that we're going to use to inform a stakeholder discussion that will take place this fall. Before making final decisions on that regulatory side. But we've publicly stated that we are exploring the potential of adopting the Advanced Clean Truck Standard, exploring the potential of clean fleet standards also, and currently have a placeholder at our air regulatory agency for a formal May initiation of a rulemaking. So we're very much looking forward to sort of diving into the technical analysis and the stakeholder discussion over the next 2 months before making a decision there. The other piece that I think we're very interested in is the potential for working with both some of the individual large fleets and with manufacturers on sort of parallel voluntary actions that can be taken to accelerate the adoption of clean vehicles in those medium and heavy duty fleets, and a big focus on public fleets. In our analysis, we didn't realize until diving in how many of the medium and heavy duty vehicles in the state are actually owned by public agencies, whether that be local government, state government, school districts, and special districts. So I think we'll have a particular focus on how we can also work with all of the government agencies to lead by example at the same time that we look at regulatory strategies and working with those private fleets. And with that, I will turn it back to the question and answer.
Thanks so much, Will. We're thrilled to have you. And I think you really set things up. And I appreciate you mentioning the medium heavy duty vehicle MOU, because the secretary also mentioned that for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And we know that will be a helpful guidepost for the 15 states, well, 14 states plus DC, who are thinking about all the tools in the toolbox to electrify medium and heavy duty vehicles, and all the actions that they can take through administrative, legislative action, et cetera, and appreciate the focus on public fleets as well. So let's repin everybody and go back to the discussion. And we had just done a question for companies. So let's do a question for our 2 states, which is really just about kind of how are you engaging with the private sector, and what do you kind of need to hear in order to set policies and proposals around medium and heavy duty vehicles? What have been the kind of the push points that you've heard, and where can government really be a force for good and change in helping the private sector move along? So I'll let whichever state wants to go first.
Well, I can start. I think, it's wonderful to have groups like Ceres that pull together business communities to support climate policy. I think first and foremost, having the support of businesses that will be affected by these regulations and standards that states are setting is just so valuable for state leaders who have to go out and sort of put their necks on the line in terms of what they'll hear from the public. And so I think, on any number of these items, whether it's this regulation or looking at cap and trade programs or changing rules around the building codes, it is very helpful from a policy perspective to have businesses asking for these changes. And we've seen it, we saw it with methane rules recently. We've seen it with medium and heavy duty fleets, any number of things. On a smaller scale side, but a side that has just as much impact, I think, is the modeling behavior from businesses doing the work themselves to get their fleets into that place, to align their climate goals with what states are doing, and then to help us by using our incentive programs and helping us fine tune them. One of the things we heard was, as we began to roll out incentives for medium and heavy duty vehicles through our existing light duty vehicle incentive program, was that, we really want to use these incentives, but we actually don't have anyone on our fleet team who knows what we need to set up a fleet of zero emission vehicles. We don't know what infrastructure we need. We don't really know which of the models we want to be purchasing. We don't know how to structure this going forward. And so that was the idea behind this pilot program we have to get the technical services that are needed to fleets and fleet managers to begin transitioning their fleet. But I think another key part of the work that state government needs to do, and something that is a big focus for Massachusetts right now, is making sure that the charging infrastructure is in place to handle all of these new fleets. And it's obviously a challenge for light duty vehicles with different models of home ownership and charging opportunities, whether you're in an urban environment or a more rural or suburban area. But I think with fleets in particular, we have to think about grid interconnections. We have to think about making sure the charging infrastructure is in place. So that's on the horizon, is something we're moving forward with.
Great. Well, thank you. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah. So I very much agree with everything that Kathleen said. Just a couple of additional comments that I would make. One of the things that I think is sort of really important to us as we engage with the private sector is to try to understand the challenges that are associated with different types and different scales of business. So when we look at our medium heavy duty fleet, what we see is that there are a large number of vehicles in a relatively small number of fleets. And then there's a really large number of fleets out there that are either single vehicle fleets or small businesses that are just a handful of vehicles. Many of those are minority owned businesses, and they have a unique set of challenges that I think are different than the challenges that the large fleets have, that often have more access to capital, more ability to take some risk, so maybe a greater level of sophistication. And so it's been, I think, very important to us as we're sort of engaging with the private sector on this strategy to really try to think through what makes sense for that wide range of stakeholders who are going to have to be a part of implementation. And trying to think through, for instance, are there opportunities where new ZEV vehicles could come into the fleets of the larger entities well, we might be able to work to then help some of the smaller entities with very old trucks actually get access to the somewhat newer diesels that are being retired by those larger fleets. And then when used vehicles from the ZEV market start to become available, to be able to work with those smaller fleets on ZEV deployment. So I think that's a really important area to us. And then I would also very much agree with the comment about making sure that we've got the appropriate charging infrastructure and the work and coordination happening with the utilities to make sure that we're thinking about the grid impacts, that, you know, unlike light duty vehicle charging, at least at the distribution system level, there may be some significant utility and investments that are going to be needed to make sure the distribution system can handle things like large bus depots and large truck depots. So we see that as a really important area for engagement between the state, the utilities, utility regulators, and those fleets.
Great, thanks so much, Will. And you know, you both brought up some really important issues that we're really trying to help bring companies together to solve, but also directly with utilities too. You know, all the players need to really be at the table. And in that vein, all of these companies have done some really great piloting or developed some best practices. So Meg, I'd love to point to you to just talk a little bit about the pilot you all are doing in Ohio. And then Chris, I'll go to you to talk a little bit about global best practices, since Siemens is really looking at some of this across the board. Go ahead, Meg.
Thanks, Sally. So we actually have two current electrification pilots that we've been working on. Allie mentioned the one that is happening in Ohio, and it's happening at our Solon factory that we have, which is right next to kind of our co-headquarters location that we have there. We make Stofers and lean cuisine at our Solon factory. And right now we have a short haul pilot project that we're doing between the factory and the distribution center that we have in Streetsboro, Ohio, which is about 12 miles away. The other one that we've also just launched is in Wisconsin, and that is from our Little Chute factory where we produce pizza, frozen pizzas. And it's to our distribution center in Freedom, Wisconsin, which is about 20 miles. So we have pilot projects activated and underway on short haul routes in both of those factory locations, and are hoping to expand those efforts in the near future.
Great, thanks, Meg. It's also good to hear about some of this happening in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Chris, I'll kick it over to you.
Okay, so one thing to think about in the electrification is there's so many different use cases, and how do you prioritize those? And so one way we're seeing out there with some of our customers, we're seeing one in Europe, to give an example, is looking at vehicles that have don't need as big batteries, such as, you know, long haul trucks. They do deliveries all day, and then they come back and then they charge overnight. And actually they don't even need a high powered charger because you have all night to charge, and they might be going into town. And so there's a trucking company we're working with in London and Paris, and they just go from the distribution center outside the city into town. And in fact, they're spending most of the day just sitting there being unloaded. And then they turn around, go back out and charge the vehicle. So those are more economical to electrify initially because the battery packs are smaller and the charging infrastructure also is smaller. And that's a pretty common use case. And then you put the long haul trucks out there further because there are more challenges, and then you need something, you know, along the highway, high powered chargers as well. So there's a real timing thing to look at there.
Great, thanks, Chris. Well, Stephen, I know you all have also done a lot of piloting for a variety of different needs that you all have had. I'd love to hear a little bit of just kind of where have been the pressure points and where have been some successes for you all.
Right. Well, I mean, there've been a lot of learnings along the way. We've got 30 trucks operating out of our Staten Island distribution center in New York, and so, you know, it has been an iterative process. There have been a few bumps in the road and things like this, but I think we're working through them, and I think we've got the right setup going forward to scale this up. mostly, I think the big barrier to scale is going to be infrastructure. I think the trucks are coming. More trucks are coming. And the use case that we're dealing with is similar to what Chris said. It's a vehicle that's only delivering. We only deliver to customers between 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. So we have long dwell times, and we're able to use kind of lower cost charging equipment. And the average daily route mileage is 80 miles or less. And so we're well within the technological abilities of battery electric trucks these days to do it. I mean, I think the reason that short haul home delivery trucks have not been electrified as much as maybe they should be is the vehicle availability is one of those issues, but also the kind of the legal environment for how these trucks are who owns the trucks today, which are these kind of small mom and pops, and so that's been a big barrier to try to overcome. But like I said, I think our setup is pretty good. It's just a matter of scaling up at this point. But yeah, I think there's so much more that we could do in that space. And then I like the idea of taking into account all these other use cases. Well, over the road trucking and corridor charging and high speed charging and stuff is all necessary. We applaud all that stuff. I think local home delivery, urban delivery routes can be electrified today, and parking and charging, and some of the same things that Kathleen brought up about multi-tenant dwelling and charging and that kind of thing. Distributed public charging would also be important for that use case in the commercial world as well. So today, a lot of the guys take their trucks home with them, and they will also need places to park and to charge those commercial trucks.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And hopefully, I know the secretary mentioned federal infrastructure dollars, which of course, I think perked everybody's ears. And I'll just say, I think all the companies on this line have joined a series advocacy efforts on the Build Back Better package and trying to get all the pieces that we need on infrastructure. But we know that the combination of state ambition, state action, and federal dollars is the dream scenario to really supercharge all of our collective efforts. And Stephen, I really appreciate the mix of the use cases and really thinking about what we need for homes and for individuals and for businesses, and that there are going to be some really good cross sections there. We've definitely heard through our corporate EV Alliance how many of our companies actually have home charging for their employees as kind of their plans to roll out and electrify their fleet. So homes have to be a part of that conversation, which of course involves all of our utilities as well. So with our remaining 12 minutes, I'm going to do kind of one question that everybody hopefully can answer. And then I'll do a couple slides at the end, just sharing for our audience the timeline for the advanced clean truck rulemakings, what we're seeing around states, and of course, kind of the future engagement opportunities. But this is a very open-ended question, so each of you can really tailor it as you will. Really, what do you kind of see next on the agenda for decarbonizing transportation, either on the policy side or within your company? And what do you need to kind of get that over the finish line? So why don't we start with Chris, and we'll go around the room. So go ahead, Chris. Okay,
I'm going to sound a bit geeky, and I'm going to focus on interconnection. And that is, having standards is so important in this space. Obviously, you need to be able to plug a vehicle into a charger into a vehicle, I guess. And you need to be able to communicate between the charger and the vehicle in order to be able to do the charging. Then you need to be able to communicate between that charger and the back end and other back ends, so you can do things like payment processing. One of the use cases in fleets is charging at home that we've talked a lot about. And when you do that, you actually want to keep track of that energy so the employee doesn't have to pay for it. So you need the software to track that, deliver it back, and so on. There are a number of standards out there. The industry is adopting more. There are, particularly in the public charging space, there's resistance to having some standards. Some of the public charging operators want to essentially lock in their customers, that you always want to come to, ABC charging company and not go to a DEF charging company. So we're big believers in open standards. They drive down costs. They give more comfort to companies and people who own the vehicles that they'll be able to use chargers when they're accessible. So part of the challenge here is getting complete universal adoption of some of the standards that are already out there and adopted widely, but not universally. And then there are a couple of standards that are, still being developed that are a couple of years out. One of those in this space in particular is megawatt level charging. So we're heavily engaged in that. So again, very strong supporters of standards to really help promote adoption.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's certainly an important issue. And the interoperability is huge. And also in thinking about the feedback loops of ideally being able to also send, some energy back to the grid during a, storm event or other stuff. I know lots of people are thinking about getting those Ford F-150s and having backup generators for their homes, which sound pretty great. So with that, Stephen, I'll turn to you next.
Sure. Great. So, I would mention, 3 things that I see or would like to see in the on the horizon here. I'd like to see more zero-emission zones, like we've seen in Europe and in Asia. Kind of automatically spurs demand for zero-emission vehicles in those areas. I'd like to see. I think we're going to see more of the kind of stuff that we're seeing that the California South Coast AQMD is doing with the indirect source rule, which pushes industrial landlords into this space where they have to start to consider the trucks that are arriving at those locations, because electric trucks in particular are kind of tethered to the charger. It makes sense not only to talk about the trucks, but to talk about where that charging infrastructure resides. And so the indirect source rule does that. And I think that's a step in the right direction. I also like, I think there's a lot of innovation happening already around the different financing models, because I think that's probably the third leg of the stool here between trucks, infrastructure, and finance. And the rental model that we're using is great, but I think there's others that are coming, some interesting lease options and things like this. And there's been some ideas thrown around about government supporting residual values through kind of an insurance play to support residual values, which would also help in being able to finance the vehicles more readily. So, and certainly stuff like the ACT already helps, maybe more traditional financing institutions think about, financing, electric commercial vehicles. So I like all that stuff. I think it's all moving in the right direction. So.
Thanks, Stephen. You set a great policy agenda, and I love the focus on some of the place-based work because, that this is where I think also the rubber literally meets the road for environmental justice communities who've been on the front lines of transportation pollution burden for way too long. And if we can really focus in and prioritize electrification in key communities, we can immediately have impacts on public health pretty quickly. With that, Will, I'll kick it over to you next.
So, given how open-ended the question was on, what's happening around in transportation decarbonization and, what do I see as the next big thing for us? Going in a slightly different direction, which is we have a major rulemaking happening, not in the context of our air regulators, but of our Transportation Commission, where we are working on a greenhouse gas pollution standard for the transportation system as a whole, in which we are setting total greenhouse gas emissions goals from transportation, both for the state as a whole and for each one of our large metropolitan areas, and then setting those as constraints upon future transportation plans, where before, say, a metropolitan region can approve transportation investments, they have to go through a modeling exercise that will demonstrate that they're actually going to achieve those greenhouse gas pollution reduction targets. And we're in the middle of a wild public hearing process right now. It'll be with 9 different hearings happening over the next months. It'll go to our commission in November for approval. And if approved, I think will be a pretty transformational policy on transportation investment in Colorado that will redirect significant investment, both to support medium and heavy duty electrification and to support much greater investment in public transit and walkable and bikeable communities that will drive down emissions and provide enormous other co-benefits to both public health, safety, and our economy.
Thanks so much, Will. And I appreciate, obviously, the focus of this conversation is on medium heavy duty vehicles, but so many of the companies that we work with are also really thinking about public transit investment and walkability and bikeability, and hopefully federal infrastructures would be another tool in the toolbox to get to those goals. But as major employers who are trying to get people to work, those are important resources for us all to be thinking about. Meg, I'll kick it over to you to talk a little bit about Nestle.
So I'm not going to dig too deep because I think my colleagues on the panel have done an amazing job of outlining some very specific policy objectives. I'm going to just take it back a step and say quite simply that we just need more states to adopt things like ACT. Bold action by state leaders, it's really urgently needed to send a clear and long-term economic signal that's really going to be necessary for market transformation. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that big, bold statement.
Great. Well, Kathleen, do you mind closing us out?
No, I think this was a terrific discussion today, and so much leadership in the public and private sector on these issues. And we are absolutely looking forward to more states joining us in the process of getting Act Now approved within Massachusetts. I think, from a Massachusetts perspective, we have to hit 1 million electric vehicles by 2030 to hit our 2030 emissions goals. And while we're doing that, to Will's point, we also need to really get people off the road. So EVs can't be a solution that just sort of perpetuates the congestion that we have today. We have to make our communities more livable, more walkable. It's something we saw a lot of desire for during the pandemic. And so it's an opportunity to really capitalize on that. But these pieces, infrastructure, financing models that allow everyone access to these types of resources, because they are hard to afford even with incentives right now. And then making sure that we're not actually transitioning more people into single occupancy vehicles while solving the climate problem here. So I think we have a lot of challenges going forward, but really a lot of great opportunities to reduce emissions, improve air quality and public health, and create jobs. So excitement ahead.
Somehow I got muted. Sorry. Thank you to all of our panelists and for an excellent discussion. We're going to pop up with just one more concluding slide. And thank you to all of them, to our states, Colorado and Massachusetts, for your leadership. And we look forward to helping get additional policies over the finish line, and to our companies for the work you're doing with your own fleets, but also really raising your voice and ensuring that we have the right public policy signals to get this done. For those who are following the map, we kind of have a little bit of the timeline here on ACT for folks. New Jersey, their comments are closed and final adoption is pending. Washington also comments are closed and final adoption is pending. Oregon comments are due on October 1st, and Massachusetts, as the secretary said, will be starting the process within the next month or so to try and get it done before the end of the calendar year. We also have heard that New York will be doing a hearing on November 9th and comments due in November. And as Will outlined, in Colorado, the stakeholder outreach will begin hopefully later this fall. With that, we can jump to the last slide and just remind folks of the medium heavy duty vehicle MOU, and that hopefully we will go beyond that group of states that I just mentioned and really go to all 15 who have joined the MOU and are thinking about tools in the toolbox related to fleet zero emission vehicle work. And in particular, we also know other states could potentially join the MOU. So hopefully we can continue to bump that number up beyond 15. And with that, I know we are at the top of the hour. I want to again thank our speakers for joining us. And we look forward to working with many of the companies and advocates on the line on advancing the advanced clean truck rule in many states throughout the next year. So stay tuned and feel free to be in touch with us. Thanks so much for joining today.